communication systems, and he would put them on 3x5 cards and send them to various places where they needed to be. And I didn't, sort of like what you're doing, I didn't know if you knew him or know
I
him.
did not know him, but I'll give you a clue as to why I didn't know him. Each of the intelligence organizations and specialties was separate, and they were not allowed to speak with each other. When I was at the intelligence career course out of Fort Huachuca, I sat next to the guy who was in NSA gathering all this information. And I said, Larry, I could have used a lot of that information. He says, you know, I could have used what you had. We never spoke. Nobody in what we called HUMINT, or human intelligence, talked to people in SIGINT, or signals intelligence, who did not talk to communications intelligence. And then there were other areas which were called electronic intelligence, as well as the satellite photography. I could use the satellite photography, but couldn't refer to that in any reports other than it was overhead photography, as if it were taken from a small plane.
And obviously that continued on long enough that the 9/11 Commission report said that the pillars of intelligence aren't allowed to continue to be pillars and cyclones by themselves, and they have to share intelligence. So it took until 9/11, 2001, and then the Commission's findings for the intelligence community to be forced into no longer served by the community.
But I'll throw a caveat on that, and that is that until 9/11, CIA was the ultimate control mechanism for all of the intelligence community, because the director of Central Intelligence was also the director of CIA. If he disagreed with your assessment or your analysis or the processing, then your stuff didn't go forward. It had to be cleared by CIA before it went anywhere. So after 9/11, I sat down with Ed Meese and we put together the framework for what eventually became the director of national intelligence. And we eliminated the director of central intelligence. So you had the director of national intelligence who would control all the community, but all the community would go directly to the DNI as opposed to the DCI. And so CIA was left out for a while.
So Clapper was going to be retired.
Yes.
Not to put you on the spot, but do you remember any names of when all of these prisoners were written down that you had put on an express airplane? Do you recall any? Because some names just seem to stand out because they're so odd.
Well, basically, that was, believe it or not, it was the highest priority as far as all of our reporting. So you would go back and type up your report on typewriters and send them up to the front office, and they would go out that night on a plane for courier dispatch back to the States. Officially, it was a big deal, but in reality, it was get it out of the system as quickly as possible. So, sorry to say, I don't remember any of the names, and it was a few years ago.
Thank you.
I have quite a few.
Huh?
Number one, you talked about spies or people in the intelligence community, covert ops, being exposed, potentially exposed. Does that correlate to Cass Sunstein's wife, Samantha, I can't remember the name of the UN secretary, unmasking people and getting them exposed and possibly eliminated?
Well, that's an extension of that issue. I was looking more at the medical aspects of it so that it could get treatment. Nonetheless, Hillary Clinton exposed so many people by name because of her emails, and she would be briefed, and then she would email top secret information over her private email to half a dozen people. Say, you know, in such and such a location, you got a special operative who's, he's got connections to these guys and these guys and these guys. So she would not only take out the operative, she would take out the support network as well. So basically, if there is anybody in the history of the United States who was guilty of treason, it was Hillary Clinton.
And that would have been for money, I assume.
No,
If
I think part of it was absolute stupidity.
But also, you mentioned people got thrown off the cars, and that, I think, correlates to Site 85 with perhaps
Right.
Ann Holland.
Yeah.
And you say that the guys would be deceased, so that's information that would be vital to her, with all the work that she's done over the years. Sad to say, if they were murdered, that's.
And the Air Force would have
story.
that information.
Yeah.
You can ask them specifically for that. And there's really quite a bit of information that's been published about that particular incident.
So then also, it's pretty fascinating, you said in the spring offensive, I mean, American soldiers were battling many battalions of North Vietnamese that were women and children. I mean, we did fight against some tanks around Khartoum, but I guess the support units would have been women and children.
Well, I doubted the question as to whether or not they were women. And I watched a napalm strike in Laos in which APCs, the Russian equivalent of the APCs, they call them BMDs, were loaded with women soldiers. And I watched two of these APCs catch fire, and all the occupants were burned to death. So I watched them burn to death, which is not, you know, something you want to do every day. But these were all young women.
No, I might have a ringer to throw at you. You might be able to help me. I have a friend that's a former Secret Service agent that was present at the 1980 meeting in the cabinet. And that was one of the reasons he revealed the meeting to Billy Hendon and exposed a deal coming through Vietnam via China, Canada to us to release 57 POWs. And Reagan was in the Oval Office debating it with Richard Allen, whom I spoke to. Richard Allen conveniently didn't want to remember the meeting, but he said at the meeting George Bush was against doing a raid or buying anybody out. And he specifically said, you mentioned Edwin Meese, he said Edwin Meese said, who gives a damn about a bunch of POWs? I mean, is that possible? I mean, I'm in shock.
Basically, when you got to the top level with people who had really no experience with war, with combat, you know, we're talking numbers, we're not talking people, we're not talking faces or anything else. It's, you know, like Hillary says, at this point, what difference does it make?
Yeah, you're expendable. Exactly.
You're expendable.
Thank you for clarifying. That does a lot. All right, well, thank you so much for your help on this.
Mhm.
Appreciate it.
That's where the word GI came from,
Yeah.
general issue.
So it ties in, excuse me, Mike, but it ties into the, a lot of the stuff that's been going on. Accused Trump of asking, and I heard the conversation, that was not asking the Russians to help, but it was kind of an aside. But, do you believe that the Russians had this information? That they got it from Hillary? Because she was unable to keep her stuff secret.
No.
So everything that she was doing in these emails. and stuff-
Everything that she had in her emails, they monitored. I mean, yeah, they monitor just as we monitor every level of communication. To think that they don't is being very naive. It's what they do. It's what we do. It's what the Chinese do. It's what the Germans do. It's what the Brits do if they could get away with it.
But in her case, because she wasn't using
Well, nothing that she used was encrypted.
because it wasn't encrypted.
It was perfectly
Wide
clear.
open.
Right. Now, for evidence purposes, it all still exists on the NSA computers because they were collecting all the stuff that she did as well. Not targeting her, but they just just collecting. Because of a change in the law of Congress that came up, behind the scenes, NSA, or the regulations governing NSA saying you cannot collect against American citizens, went out the window, and Congress said, okay, that's okay now. And that's probably one of the most frightening pieces of action of Congress in the last 100 years. They said it was okay to spy on Americans for NSA. And, we're talking incredible capabilities there, and you just don't want,
You mean the hammer?
that's,
However,
that's a
in a good
piece.
sense with the Hillary thing, okay, if you think about it this way, think of it as the spider and the starfish. All of that information that she had on that server is replicated in probably 50 different places. And so,
And she didn't know it, or what?
oh, I'm sure she did. That woman, pure evil, I'm sorry. Point being is that, when we were in Laos last month, essentially, we're the only ones that are pretending that things didn't exist, or that we weren't in Cambodia, or we weren't in Laos, or, that we pulled out all of our assets and the Thai fought the war, continued to fight the war with the Australians for 2 more years, because of Henry Kissinger. So it's like, we're sitting here in our own little bubble thinking that these things don't exist. Everybody else knows that Hillary Clinton was doing this, and we're the only ones that are sitting here with our, no, this didn't exist.
One
You know?
thing that we've avoided discussing in this group here is the fact the really bad guy in a lot of this was Henry Kissinger, and he continues to be the bad guy. He's below the surface. He's the guy that has orchestrated a great much of, the problems that we have today.
And it was, when I went to Trump Tower to invite Trump to Rolling Thunder, I went outside and I saw Carl Cameron. And I said that, he said, you went up to see Trump? And I said, yeah. He said, well, he went to see Kissinger. I said, you mean the man who called us dumb, stupid animals and retools us foreign policy? He said, that's right. And I said, you have to wonder why he would even go to see him. Was he not informed?
Now, the value of maintaining contact with Kissinger is like Sun Tzu said,
No, he-
keep your enemies
closer.
closer than your friends. And I think, anybody who's been around the block once or twice recognizes that Kissinger is as dirty as they come. Not that I ever cast judgment on anyone. You, sir, have a question.
You mentioned that most of your information that you gave her today is open source information.
Pretty much.
That's fine. And I'm not talking about McCain, he's dead.
He's dead.
That's good. But when I'm talking about this other information, I work with a group of scholars,
Right.
Vietnam veterans, who are trying to counter the leftist propaganda on war. It's a kind of comparison to Don Quixote trying to tilt windmills.
Right.
But in all writings that I have seen of these guys, and they've seen some of mine, and that I haven't seen any of this information put out, and it would make sense. A good reason for the history of the Vietnam War.
Well,
And so my question was, have you read your published anything?
I will in the future.
Okay.
Now,
Thank you.
I will comment that I do have a full collection of national intelligence estimates which have been declassified that go from 1952 until 1975, covering the Vietnam War. And in that, it's detailed information as to why we were there, and almost a monthly assessment of what was going on there and so on. Absolutely fascinating. But each one of these, they're mostly NIEs, National Intelligence Estimates, and an occasional SNIE, or Special National Intelligence Estimate. But as far as I can tell, the reason that we were in Vietnam was not so much to help the Vietnamese keep independence, but was to pick a fight with the Chinese. And that all fell through when they had the Cultural Revolution and China dissolved from within, so we couldn't pick a fight with them anymore. But this was behind
The
the
Chinese had the goods on George Bush.
That's it.
This is fascinating.
So, any more questions?
Yeah, no,
Oh.
You answered mine, thank you very much.
hang on.
Can you please clarify, to pick up the fight with Chinese how?
The fight with the Chinese?
Clarify just the last thing. How to pick up the fight with Chinese?
Everything leading up to each one of these national intelligence estimates gave the internal situation in China, saying, you know, this is what's going on here, here, and there. And in some of it, the conclusion was, if we were to have, you know, a war with China, then this would be at their weakest point. They never come out and say, well, we're going to do it, you know, we want a war, but everything was kind of leading up to that point. And then the Cultural Revolution that came about in China underscored or disrupted the stability in China. So there was, at that point, no point for war. Sometimes, you know, you get people.
They were actually preparing for the real war with China?
Well, it doesn't go into that in specifics in the intelligence estimates. That material doesn't appear in an intelligence estimate. They simply, those are designed to give a status report. And then the decisions to make, you know, to go to war or whatever are carried out in different elements. But the National Intelligence Estimate simply examines another country and says, okay, this is what their current status is at this point. But the thread there was China was weak. And we did national intelligence estimates on the Soviet Union saying, well, this year they're not in a strong position because their crops are, you know, they're losing their crops because of rust. So, you know, nothing in an estimate says go to war. That's for somebody else to decide. Yes, sir.
This just came to my mind when you're talking about Kissinger, but what would you say the chances of flipping Kissinger would be?
Of doing which?
Flipping Kissinger on the POW issue?
If you pressed him on it and pushed him into the public realm and squeezed him on it in the public realm,
Or show how it could be to his
if
advantage?
you could show it so that he could be a hero, he could probably come up with some good information. But his deal was, everybody thought that, you know, he'd cut this deal so that we would make these payments to the Vietnamese, and you know, everything would be hunky-dory. And it was Congress that denied the money. It was Kissinger who came back and said, you know, if we pay the Vietnamese for these prisoners, that's a bad signal to give to them, and so we shouldn't really go down that pipe. So it was his input that caused Congress to not come up with
It seemed to me, though, that we had agreed,
money.
the Vietnamese had agreed to do certain things.
Right.
One of which was to keep South Vietnam
Free.
independent
Right.
of North Vietnam.
But
When
either
that
way-
happened, when it didn't happen, then I think all bets were off.
True, but in 1972, Kissinger had given Zhou Enlai the go-ahead to move into all of Southeast Asia.
And then we have 70,000 troops in South Korea.
So much
South
for the
Vietnam.
CETO Treaty.
I'm not quite sure how many were there,
There were
but
thousands.
we
yeah.
still had quite a large presence in Vietnam.
But that's the way it's going. This is at the end of the war when they signed these agreements. They said that part of them was that the North Sea Vietnamese would stay out of and leave Vietnam. They wouldn't try to take over Vietnam. And yet we had, part of the agreements was that we left Kissinger involved there too. Well, I think 60 or 70,000 troops. Maybe not that many, but lots. Right in South Vietnam. Anyway, your expertise seems to be, among other things, so many things, that Laos. What did you go to some of the camps where they had kept American prisoners?
No,
Did you know of them?
I knew of them. The Sing Quang camp was the largest, and we knew that others existed, but we couldn't pinpoint precisely where they were. I could have found out directly on one occasion after I got captured, but I decided that I would not honor the hosting of my fellow Laotians in Tet Lao, and so I managed to leave. But I could have gone to one of those camps firsthand.
Okay. One of our guys did, Kuzman. He was there only a short time, like 6 months or so, and he was able to escape. I hadn't talked to him, I should. Anyway, he was in the camp